G'day, people. Welcome again to this weekly webcast. Over the last number of weeks since COVID started, we've been moving through a process of bringing you bits of content with wonderful people from all around the place. We started off talking about how do we deal with that peak crisis response and all of the stuff that went on for people emotionally and logistically in those early days of trying to deal with COVID-19 as it unfolded. And we've transitioned into talking more about recovery and what does this look like as we emerge from it. It's a very different kind of headspace dealing with peak crisis and recovery. I'm really delighted today to have Suzanne Waldron with me. Suzanne and I have the wonderful delight of working with many clients in common in Perth. Sometimes we get to actually work in the same room on the same stuff with them, and that's absolutely delightful when it happens. And quite often we're working on completely different things with the same clients, and that's a delight too, because I know that the work Susan's doing will add richness and depth to the stuff that I'm doing, even though we're not working together. Suzanne describes herself as a behavioural facilitator. She's a curator, which means working intensively with TEDx here in Perth, but it's so much broader than that. She's an avid explorer and collector of interesting ideas and concepts and brings them together in wonderful ways.
Great.
And she's also an artist and a writer. She's just finished writing her next book, which is Sleeping Giants, a whole heap of short, really punchy pieces around different emotions that people experience, and that's coming out in June, isn't it, Susan?
Yeah, it's literally right in design at the moment.
Awesome.
And yeah, it'll be out in my hands in like 3 weeks. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be so exciting, and if I've got the picture right, it's going to be filled with bits of your art and just nice pithy statements about various things that are part of the human experience.
Funnily enough, you've got part of that right. I decided to engage my beautiful friend Natalia Fadika to do the art. So it's my art. The art that you see, the colourful art, is my art.
Yep.
On the book is actually her art. Yeah.
Cool.
And that's under wraps at the moment, so you haven't seen it yet.
Right. I look forward to seeing that. It's going to be such a delightful read. So when we first started talking about this, it was actually in the middle of peak crisis, and you and I were having a chat about how much challenge there was going to be for people as we went into lockdown. For some of us, we've done lots of work on ourselves, and as we were leading into this conversation, you were just saying, I see myself, and that's a challenge for us, isn't it? To genuinely see ourselves with all of our strengths and capabilities, and also weaknesses and foibles and things that trip us up. And we were discussing maybe doing something about, how do you deal with confronting yourself, because that was the reality of what isolation was going to do for a lot of people. We never quite got around to that, and here we are more in the recovery end of things. So I'm kind of interested in, given how much big thinking you do, and also the amount of big thinkers that you're in contact with, what are some of the things that you're observing as we're coming out of peak crisis? So particularly around people whose thinking is really coming into its own, or new bits of thinking that you're seeing.
Oh, I love this frame and question. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Well, this man I was talking to asked me a question. He said, what have you noticed about humans during this time? Have they surprised you? And I said, no. I think they've surprised themselves, because I kind of always believe in humans. Like, I always feel like, have faith in humanity, and I believe that everyone does the best they can with what they've got at the time. And that's a big statement, and there's a lot under it, and I know it can be provocative, and there's a lot of things in there, but ultimately that's what I believe. And what I think has been really beautiful is to watch other people see themselves and go, oh my goodness, I can adapt, and I am able. And even though it might be hard, or it might be confronting, or maybe it was easy, I don't know, it's not my place to judge their experience, but what I'm seeing is people seeing themselves. And in some of the stuff that I've been looking at, well, for a long time, but it's been illuminated and highlighted during this process. Actually, there's a couple of things I want to talk about potentially, but one of them was one of the big thinkers that I've really been following is like my future, like he's just like my idol, and I think, oh my God, I want to be him, but though really, of course, I just want to be myself, is Charles Eisenstein. Have you heard of him?
Oh, I actually haven't, no.
He wrote Sacred Economics. And he does a lot of work around what the systems and economic theories that we're in have prevented us from really being able to collectively connect and communicate with one another, because we've, in the economic theory that we're currently under, you know, which is capitalism and many other sort of political and social sort of structures, have sort of governed us and led us into attainment and achievement and financial like fixation, almost like profit fixation.
Yeah.
And he is looking at this theory, like a sacred economics, is, you know, a more circular theory. I don't know if you've seen the donut theory as well, which is around the economic structure around, if we've got enough for everyone, we won't have this massive hierarchy or divide between rich and poor or healthy or non-healthy, that, you know, and so whatever those polarizations are. And so what I think is beautiful about this experience at the moment is we're sort of allowing ourselves to level out, because we have to. And my friend of mine who introduced me to Charles, Claire Vanderplank, she explained something to me that I thought was really prevalent. And that was, she said, in the old days or days before this, when, you know, there's been a plague or there's been some kind of catastrophe, people who were well could then take themselves out of that situation, move to another land or another territory and conquer that territory. And this is the first time in the world ever in the history of humanity where we are globally and equally, and we can't even, not actually even equally, because I think Perth in Australia is a beautiful little bubble where the rest of the world is not in recovery. You know, we might be, but the rest of the world. But this is the first time where equally we can't go anywhere else, or we aren't able to go and conquer. So then we've had to be collective with one another rather than separate. I'll shut up for now because I can talk about it forever. But that's some of the stuff that I've been fascinated in, is looking at the economic principles. That's why I think I might be a closet economist. I never knew about myself. Okay.
It's actually a fascinating field, isn't it? It's when I was at school, anything to do with numbers at all just kind of did my head in, and so my instinctive response to it was pretty much to shut down, and economics was very much in there, and it seemed like such a dry and dull topic at school. Over the last little while, I've run into a number of people who are deeply embedded in finance and economics in various ways, and I know this is true for you as well. And just seeing the incredible creativity that actually sits behind some of that territory. It seems as though that world is a little bit polarized. There's a group of people who tend to be very black and white and compliance kind of oriented, and then there's this other polar extreme where they're just so creative, and their capacity to see the world at kind of a big systemic level is quite profound. And so I've found myself kind of, I couldn't claim to understand economics even slightly, but I have got significantly more excited and interested by it of late.
Because it's about the way we live. You know, economics isn't about accounting, although it includes it. It's about, you know, the economy, and the economy was one of the greatest inventions that ever happened really with humanity, is how to trade and how to pass and how to communicate and share. And so with economy, it's really that, like, how do we live and how do we live the best? And unfortunately, sometimes because of humanity, we go to that primal instinct of being like completely and utterly like competitive, trying to take all rather than sharing. And so I think our economy has risen itself personally to a place where greed and corruption and, you know, taking all that you can has prevailed. So in this experience, I think what's happening is we're able to recognize the leveling, more of a, and I don't want to sound like a complete socialist, but being able to level ourselves and to share with one another in a way that actually really supports the humanity, within us rather than just this aggressive competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you come across Simon Sinek's new book? What's it called? The Infinite Game, it's called.
Yes, yeah.
Um,
So game A and game B.
yes,
Yeah.
So I've been diving into that a little bit of late, and one of the ideas he puts forward there is that the version of capitalism that we've got now, which is very oriented, as you say, towards perpetual growth and a bit dog eat dog, and very driven by greed, is actually quite a bending of that model in terms of how it was supposed to be. And
exactly right.
Very much talking about how do we get this back to something that is inherently generative rather than more likely to sort of ultimately end in collapse.
And to do that, you see, and I know this is like a full circle thing, but I'm not kidding when I say all the work that I do is helping people bring themselves back to themselves, so they don't have to feel like they have to protect, and they don't have to feel like they are on this cutthroat mission to succeed. Like thinking about how much money one needs, like really how much money one needs to be able to survive in a way. Why do I need a couple of $1 million a year, for example, versus people who are in the slums in Africa? That I lived in the slums in Africa in an orphanage for a while to try and understand a very different life to my own. So it just begs all those questions. And then who do we need to become so that we don't have to sort of chase after things that aren't necessarily actually fulfilling for us?
Yeah.
What kind of world do we need to live in to be able to sustain that generosity and that connection rather than just, greed and gain?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting piece that's emerged over the last several weeks, couple of months. There's been some delightful periods of, you used the word levelling before, and I think part of the mechanism there's been that this is the first time, at least in our sort of reasonably recent generational time, that we've faced something that's genuinely global and where no one is able to distance themselves from it.
Yeah.
And I've seen some stuff that's where the result of that's been people really kind of reconnecting with what it means to be human as opposed to what it means to be Australian or rich or poor or from this ethnic background or religion or whatever, and much more about who are we and therefore who am I as well. It's been delightful to see some of the levels of cooperation and that sort of ability that humans have to adapt and sort things out come to the fore. And there's some really beautiful ways that people have kind of worked together and stepped over or around some of the divides that might normally sit between us and just get on with it. It'll be interesting to see how much of that we can hang on to as we sort of head into somewhat easier times.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, so this is my philosophical self. What's easier? Is this not easier? Well, for me, it feels like it is, for me personally. And also, and understanding more globally, not everyone is heading into new times. Some people are heading into the long haul of lockdown now.
Yeah.
England and the UK, for example, are further restricting. And so it's easy for us to think that we're coming out of the woods. So we might be freedom in New Zealand and Australia, for example, much freer to roam around, but there's still going to be the implications of boundaries and borders being shut, and the rest of the world, we are so governed also by the rest of the world, and they aren't in easier times. But I'm actually more interested in thinking about what is easy, what is easy.
Yep.
Because this is where that mindset frame that you and I work with so much allows us to go, what kind of frame do we want to put in our life? And I was talking to this guy the other day. He said to me, what's your definition of good? And I said, I don't really have one. And he was talking about coaching with me.
Mm.
And he said, do you care if I sort of what outcome I get to? I said, not at all. I said, literally, as long as you're choosing your outcomes, what you choose and the criteria of that is completely and utterly, hello.
G'day, Kevin. Welcome.
Welcome, Kevin. You've missed all the good stuff.
We've been on quite a ramble for people joining us just now. So Kevin on the live call and anyone joining us on the recording, we've been talking about economics. We've been talking about cooperation. We've been talking about truly seeing and understanding yourself. Some big thinkers that have either emerged during this time or are sort of coming into their own. We've been talking about writing and thoughts and ideas and conveying them to other people. And Suzanne's just talking now about the notion of good.
Yeah, what is good? And so to me, I think to myself, good summary recap there, by the way, Mike, thanks for listening. But the summary of good really is like, what is the criteria of your life? Like, I don't need to know Kevin's criteria or June's criteria or yours. Like, as long as you know your criteria and you're okay with that, and then you choose that criteria, that to me, that's what the definition of good life is. And so that's dependent on each person and their own unique needs. So whether this is easy or not easy is kind of almost irrelevant in some ways. It's like, what kind of life are you leading, and who are you deeply, and how are you able to move between what your criteria are based on any given external environment that ever will approach you?
I think actually the idea of ease, for me, it's one of those things that sits alongside happiness. It's an idea that's not necessarily all that helpful. I've been doing some fascinating interviews over the last several weeks of leaders, mostly Perth-based, around my new book, which is called Unshakable, about setting organisations and teams up to deal with uncertainty and pressure and times where things are a little bit unpredictable. Seemed like a good time to write it just now. One of the curious things about that is that a lot of the people are expressing their desire to move into places of discomfort, and they're almost universally saying that doing that not only leads to enormous self-understanding and growth, but it's actually often the shortest road to the greatest comfort. We fairly readily play around the edges of wanting to be happy, wanting it to be easy, and thereby avoiding things that we'd be better off just diving into and getting on with.
And you know what? I'm going to go straight down the frigging path here and say this is where I think that consumerism and materialism and individualism has really led us down this road to think that the world is shiny and everything is great. That's about marketing as far as I'm concerned. And we've really lost our way in being able to play all of the octaves of our heart. You know, like Michael Singer is a beautiful man who talks about playing all of the octaves. Because if you didn't play all of the strings on a harp or all of the keys on the piano, you wouldn't have the depth and richness of all of that can come with that type of music. And so we have been, guided and cajoled and taken to all sorts of different places simply because of this overarching capitalist structure, which I still do like capitalism. I don't mind living in a capitalist structure personally. But when we take it to the nth degree and we go to this place where it's about that attainment, and like we've just basically got it all wrong. Like what are we chasing? And even chasing happiness or easiness isn't right compared to chasing money or attainment or a really big house. It's, when we come back to the depth of who we are and all the parts of ourselves, then we realize that we've actually got everything we need within us. And I know I get deep and meaningful, but we've only got 40 minutes, so we have to talk about I don't have a coffee.
You've got to get deep quickly when we've only got 40 minutes.
It's the same in the street, though. I'm the same in the street, let alone here.
It's a fascinating, I think, that thing of we've got everything that we need. Love to explore that a little bit more. One of the major pieces of realization that people typically had on those long survival walks that I used to run, 10 days in the desert, soapbox-sized survival kit, whatever clothes you're standing up in, and a couple of litres of water, and find everything food and water-wise off the land as you went along. What happens in that journey is there's this initial descent where you go, oh, we are so screwed. We haven't got anywhere near enough stuff, and how are we going to get by? And I'm going to be hungry, and I'm going to be disconnected from toys and tools that I'm used to. And you kind of hit a turning point, a bottom point, where you realise that actually, if I'm hungry for this entire time, and, you know, again, from our particular bubble, we came into that experience pretty fat, got a bit of capacity to go without for a while, but
for quite like, I don't know, a year maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
That's my current status.
But you kind of go, oh, I can, even if hungry lasted for the entire time, I would be okay. And you start to realise that you're actually not even using all of the stuff that's in that soapbox-sized survival kit. There's 2 or 3 things that you use every day. And even if you lost those, there's ways that you could achieve that from the bush. And so there's this beautiful thing that starts to happen mentally where you really deeply examine everything that you surround yourself with in life and start to consciously think about, why is that in my box, and should it even still be there? And we used to talk a lot about this thing of where we get want and need confused. So, and, you know, I think somebody said a while back, I can't remember where the quote came from, but one generation's luxuries become the next generation's necessities. We sort of have this growing ball of necessity. It's like, I've got to have that, got to have that, got to have that to be comfortable, to be happy. So I'm interested in that thought, you know, how do we set ourselves up for being entirely comfortable with what we've got? Because at any given point in time, both in terms of what we've got and our capability personally, but also the material stuff we surround ourselves with, is just what we've got. And if we can be content there, that's a place of fairly significant power, I think. What's your take on that? How do you line yourself up for contentment, which I think is different from happiness and ease?
Completely. Okay, I've got 72 different thoughts. Poor Kevin. He's just going to be like, what the hell have I walked into?
Now she's got to pick an octave.
I'm going to pick C. Sensible.
Oh, good.
That's the only one I know.
Just for a bit of background, Suzanne, Kevin's the deputy principal of the state instrument services.
Instrumental music school services, yeah.
That's it. So they go all over the state providing specialist music instruction. So your choice of metaphor there is well and truly in his
I'm
world.
a spiritual being. I knew it.
Lovely. I thought you'd tailored this for me when I came in.
Yep, this is all for you.
It's just for you, Kevin. This is just for you.
This is just for Kevin. Oh my God, I'm totally excited about that. Okay, could you just quickly remind me what we were saying?
We were talking about arriving at a point of contentment and satisfaction with whatever we currently have in this moment, both personally and materially.
Do you know, I think, okay, the first thing I'm going to say is exposure. So, you know, if you're just watching TV and you're just reading a newspaper and you're just going to, you know, you're doing the same route to work or school or whatever every day, like you're literally only going to be exposed to a few things. And so, of course, then your echo chamber of experience is what it is. So when we expose ourselves to more, it allows us to widen our thinking, of course. But then how do you get to the point where you even feel like exposing yourself to more? Because that's a comfortable, protected space. See, what's happened here is that comfort has been removed from us, outside of ourselves. So Alain de Botton, who potentially could be my future husband if I ever got to meet him, who is a philosopher, he basically said, this is the first time that in our world, in our lifetime as a human race, have we ever worshipped ourselves. So he said, you know, way back in the day, you know, we would worship the stars, and then it was the gods, and then nature. And it's always something bigger than ourselves. It was always more than who we are individually or as a race. But this is the first time that we've seen our own power through science in the age of genius, which is, you know, when science really was sort of recognized and measurement was recognized, that we can worship ourselves. And with that, we both then take on the responsibility and the full 100% responsibility of not only our successes, but also our failures. And so we think that everything resides around us, and that we have complete control and complete connection to anything that happens to us. And we have lost the mystery of a universal force, or perhaps even a spiritual force. And so what happens is, when we're just, you know, from my perspective, when we're just seeing these, you know, media releases or connection into the community that is really only the same stuff that could be political propaganda or whatever it might be, we are really diminishing our ability to see beyond and something more possible. So when we believe that to be true, then we believe everything outside of ourselves is something that we are being controlled by, or we can control. But we've lost the essence of the actual depth of who we are, and our ability to really connect to knowing ourselves, because we're too busy noticing all of the extreme versions of other people's agendas. And so when we are worshipping ourselves from the wrong perspective, being I want to succeed, or I want to be the best, or I want to get the most, we are then combining these two things, i.e. I worship myself based on the external needs of getting and gaining, rather than contributing and connecting. So I think this is what this is giving us a chance to do, when we can cut the crap out basically of all the stuff that's coming in at us, it's other people's agendas and other people's needs. We might be quiet enough to be able to see ourselves and to realize the simplicity of the humanity is actually just about love, and it is about connection. And I bring it back to the simplicity of that, because I think, like, whenever I get lost, or wherever I get completely, you know, taken off on an ego journey or whatever, I realize that I've just lost love. I've lost the ability to see beauty and joy and creativity. And I think everything of that stems from the love of myself, and the love of the fact that I'm made up of all these particles and atoms, and so is the world, and the sound of music, and everything that around us is completely and utterly connected through energy. But we lose our way because of our exposure to the external forces of other people's agenda, and this extreme version of capitalism that is basically wanting us to get by, you know, attain and go bigger and bigger and bigger. But that is the finite game, right? That, you know, Charles Eisenstein, Jamie Wheel, Simon Sinek are talking about, that has a finite place, and it will not be able to allow us to go any further. And so if we strip all of that back to a really simple message, we need to expose ourselves outside of the echo chamber of media and consumption and materialism. And we need to start seeing ourselves, being gentle, and actually seeing our own emotions, feeling everything that we're supposed to feel, and not blocking stuff because it's supposed to be shiny. Okay, that's my rant.
Yeah, I like that. How would you... So this feels to me like a yes and, or a yes but kind of a moment. So as you're talking through all of that, I'm going yes, I love it. It resonates on so many levels. And or but there's this part of being human that's about striving for bigger and better in some kind of way that is so I believe hardwired into us. It's one of the reasons why humans as a species are so successful, is that we have this sort of edgy discontent. We look around our environment and we go, oh, you know, I reckon if I could make that stone into an axe, I could do that so much easier and quicker, and now I can build this and I can make that. And you know, that leads us to some incredible achievements and some really wondrous discoveries and inventions, and, you know, all the very positive side of what success and striving and, you know, but having that sort of forward-looking, future-looking orientation brings to us.
Okay, I have got
Somehow there's a balance in there too.
loads of thoughts again in this, if you don't mind sharing.
Go for it. Go for it.
So that's our blessing and our curse, right? So
Yep.
our blessing is that we're meaning-making machines. We want to evolve. We are designed to evolve, just much like the universe is as well. What's really fascinating to me is you can take out the entire human race and nobody would notice. We are not needed. The planet will probably be better off without us, and the universe will carry on in its own expression of many different ways. We're not needed. We are not necessary. And I'm sorry for everyone listening. It's like me. I basically just said there is no Santa Claus. So I've
Okay, so we'll just end the call there then, folks. That's
everything I say. Sorry, Mike. You're never going to have anyone listen to your second. But when I think about that, so innately, so primarily, because we are meaning-making machines and we're the only species that we know of that is going to have this kind of consciousness that allows us to grow and to evolve, we have a primal need to learn and to evolve. Of course we do, but can we use that to love more, to create more, to nurture more, rather than get more, build more, extract more? Do you know what I mean? So it's the frame and the environment and the context around which we are growing and evolving, I think, is the question, rather than the need to evolve.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that distinction, that nuance is really important. So for me, it feels like those things exist really comfortably side by side. There's some paradox and some challenge in there where it feels more like a game of balance, balancing something on your finger, rather than a static state. So in life, I notice myself moving between times of deep satisfaction with whatever, it's like I just really could care less about what all of this is. I'm content with it. And other times of, it feels like something's under your skin. Writing's a bit like that, isn't it? Where you've got the concept of a book and it's like, well, do I have to write this book? But I really want to. It feels kind of urgent to do this now. So you could say, well, that's the opposite of contentment, and they're both kind of nice. And then finding that spot in the execution of something that feels worthwhile, of contentment with the struggle, I guess, of bringing it into being, whatever that is.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, who are you doing it for? So we're both just writing, and I've just finished my second book, and I actually think I wrote it for me. And I know that sounds a bit weird, because my last book I didn't write for me. And this book, I feel like I wrote for me. It's like it's taught me who I am at this current point. And there's a part of me that kind of just feels like its glorious ability to potentially help others if they were to read it or not is lovely. But I'm not attached to it. I'm not attached to even if anyone else ever read it, because like it is making me who I am now. And that's not in a self-centered, egotistical way. It was just like this discontent and struggle that I went through to just choose what to put in the book and how to explain it and what I actually meant by it. Now, my hope in the person that I am and that you are as well is that we can participate in other people's wellness and other people's ability to live the life that they, are meant to be. And I would love that if that happened, but I'm not attached to it. And so that's new for me, because usually I would be like, oh my God, I want to sell, 7 million of them, and I want to be all this like ego wants. Michael Singer, again, my other amazing love that I think is incredible. He says you should trade expectations for appreciation.
Oh, I love it.
I know.
Trade expectations for appreciation. I love it. I actually bang on a lot about expectations. I used to say when I was instructing survival that expectations are actually what leads people to die in the outback. We're whizzing along in an air-conditioned car expecting to go from A to B, and something happens in between. And we've still got this expectation that we're going to get there, and it drives us to do really bizarre things like leave the vehicle and try to walk to the highway instead of just stay there. And I see it all the time in business as well. There's something quite compelling about planning and, having future markers put down for ourselves. And But at that point that we start to hang on to them too tightly, they can bend us out of shape in all kinds of ways. So it's sort of that balance between placing those markers out there and genuinely striving for them, but holding them lightly enough that if it doesn't work, we can just go, yeah, that's okay. We'll stretch the timeline. Or
I remember us being in a class together, like we were teaching, like we were.
Yes.
I don't ever call it class or teachings. I don't know where that came from, but
well, because Kevin's here.
Yeah, it's your fault, Kevin.
Been there, done that.
It's all about blame. Just blame everybody else. But we were talking. You said, do something. Be lightly. What was it? Do
lightly. Be deeply.
That's it. Do lightly, be deeply. I remember when he said it, I lost all of my thoughts. I was just like,
yeah.
And so I think that is a stellar piece of advice, you know, and our mentor who we work with says, hold on tight with an open palm.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I call it, because I still get really stuck. I think, like, I don't know if you would or not, but I get really stuck sometimes. So I'm like, I want to have intentions and I want to strive for something, but then I'm like, totally go with the flow and just follow the universal presence, you know? And so then I'm like, how do you know, be directional, but not attached? You know, how do you want to get somewhere, but not expect it? And so I think it's a constant dance personally for me to be able to sort of think like, how do I need to be? So I call it directional intention. So I'm just like, here's a direction, here's my intention, here's the beauty within that intention. And essentially then from there, I trust the aim more than myself will be in play, and I won't be so rigid as to force it in, you know, into practice.
Yeah, like that. I tend to.
That's a lifelong practice. This is not just a thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've got that now.
I've nailed that.
You've got it.
Tick.
So you just come along and goes.
Yeah, that's. I've got a good friend who's been saying at the moment that's in fact exactly why COVID-19 appeared, because she was in a place where she thought she had it nailed, and so she was served up a global crisis to just sort of show her that it wasn't quite all as nailed as she thought it was.
I will blame her then for all of this wondrousness.
That's it. Look, we're 40 minutes flies by really quick. We're nearly at that amount of time. It is as I expected it would be, a delightful conversation that's taken us down a wondrous set of rabbit holes, and any one of them would be worthy of a day's worth of conversation in its own right.
Welcome to my head. That's all I can say.
So thank you very much. I really, as I said at the start, love getting around your energy and your deep thinking and your connection to so many other thinkers and pieces of work around the planet. It's always really, really useful.
Hey, too.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's again, you know, a bit like you said with your book. I've been doing this with an outward-facing kind of a view, but largely it's been because it felt like a really useful thing for me to do during this period of time, and my hope is that it's useful to others as well. Next week, I'm pretty excited. Our mutual good friend Rachel Callender's joining me to talk about communication and reconnection with people as we start to emerge from lockdown a little bit. If you had to say in a couple of minutes what we could expect from Rachel, what would you say? A short snapshot of her.
That's beautiful, because I'm actually hanging out with her tomorrow.
Oh, cool.
So we'll be like, I'll hand over the baton of Mike energetically to Rachie, and then she can come next week, and then we'll have this connection together.
Delightful.
Rachel is a beautiful, heart-centered. Do you know what I think of her? She teaches me how to be quietly rebellious.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like she's gentle and soft and beautiful, and so absolutely non-conformist that it surprised you.
Yeah.
And she's just she's about connection and hope and love, and she just doesn't follow the rules, but it doesn't seem like it. She's just beautiful. You will love, like your heart will just feel so nurtured, anyone watching that.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. We'll dive into the world of communication and connection. That's really Rachel's area of expertise, I guess. Expertise is a word we like to use lightly, holding on tightly with an open palm, as you said earlier. So I'm looking forward to that call. Again, Suzanne, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute delight spending time in your orbit, and I look forward to the next time we get to work together inside the same room.
I know, me too. Thank